You're invited to experience online healing retreats brought to you by acoustichealth.com. These magical online gatherings give you valuable insights, exercises, and channeled information on the great shift of the ages. Visit acoustichealth.com and click on online retreats, or check out our retreat archive and download the recordings. Life-changing online retreats by acoustichealth.com. Welcome to another healing conversation brought to you by acoustichealth.com. I'm Loren Gailey, and today we're going to be talking about the world's ancient sites and how it's all tied into Lemuria. My guest today is an author of many books on his research through his life on the world's ancient mysteries and megaliths on the planet. Brien Foerster, thank you so much for being on Healing Conversations today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
When you grew up, you had your eye on your career as a marine biologist, and you spent time and worked over in Hawaii as well, and your fascination with the Native American Indians and the totem poles led you to even leave your marine biology field. But when you were in Hawaii, you became part of the canoe, the sailing canoe. Tell us about getting to Hawaii and to your research that you do today.
Okay, well, basically I started carving when I was a child, and even though I did, get a degree in marine biology, I didn't feel a real passion for it. It was more of an intellectual thing, and the carving just continued with me, and so I just decided to, after working for a short period of time as a biologist, I just decided that I would try to, if I could become a professional carver, which I did for many years. My interest in Hawaii started when I was a child, and I went the first time when I was 12, and it just so happens that at about the age 35, I kind of felt that I'd learned enough about the native West Coast art and belief systems, and so I was drawn to Hawaii, and I was welcomed by a man called Keola Sakara, who was a master canoe maker, and he wanted to build a 62-foot voyaging double-hull canoe to go to Tahiti, so I just dropped everything in Canada and moved to Hawaii. I have a tendency to let my spirit guide me to do things, even though sometimes my family think I'm crazy for doing it, but that's the passion of my spirit.
That's fascinating, because when you were doing that in Hawaii, I was over in Guam covering that as a reporter.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That is an amazing synchronicity. And now, through your research on the Pacific and sacred sites, including work that you are doing for the lost continent of Mu, Lemuria, which we'll talk about, you've also been featured on Ancient Aliens. Let's talk about Lemuria and how you and I mean, the synchronicity that you and I had. We didn't meet, but I come to find out later, after finding your videos on Peru and the ancient sites, and then seeing your name and finding your website and seeing your photo, I realized you sat in front of me on 11/10/11 last year as we were flying from Lima to Puno, or Juliaca. That is fascinating. Wow. As well. And so being in the high altitude and going there and doing that travel from very little sleep the night before, I just heard the conversation that you had with Easter Island. You were knowledgeable on Peru, and it was just quite fascinating. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation today.
That's great.
So let's talk then about Lemuria, because we see that the pre-Inca sites in Peru are colonies from Lemuria. Is that what you've discovered?
Well, the thing is, the concept of Lemuria is very... There are so many different ways of interpreting it, and what I've been trying to do is, rather than simply doing what one would call like a channeling kind of thing. I've been looking for actual physical evidence of it, which is difficult. But the important thing is that the elders in Hawaii taught me a lot of things which relate to it, including Auntie Pua Lindsay, who adopted me basically because I was involved in the canoe project. She took me into her confidence, and one day she showed me these two stone objects, which she used for healing purposes, and one was in the shape basically of an Easter Island head, and the other was the shape of a jaguar's head. And I noted that they were incredibly ancient, and so I asked her, I said, Auntie Pua, these aren't from Hawaii, are they? And she said, no. And I said, are these from Mu? And she said, yes, they are. And she said it with a very straight face. So it hasn't been something I've been deeply, chasing after. It's just through synchronicity, different places attract my attention, including the Cook Islands, Tahiti, and now Peru. And they all seem to be interrelated in the fact that there was once a very high civilization in the Pacific.
And so you are on your way now, in a few hours from now, to Easter Island. What's on your agenda for Easter Island?
I don't really have an agenda. What I've done is I've done a fair bit of research. I do have some contacts there. So I'm simply going there with the belief that the ancestors of the place and the elders, if they choose to, will show me certain things which I'm allowed to write about.
Let's go back to the elders in Hawaii and the stone objects that you saw. Did you just know to ask if they were from Mu? Does that mean that Hawaii was not part of Mu, or they had come from a place that was now underwater?
No, actually it seems that from speaking to Hawaiian elders, they believe that Hawaii is what is left of Mu, and that 12,500 years ago, when the sea level was about 350 feet lower than it is today, that the islands of Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and Kaho'olawe were all one island. And Oahu was much closer then because of the low sea level, and also the Big Island was lower. So they regard that whole mass of land that existed at that time as having been what we call Mu. It's not that the continent sank, it's that the ocean level rose, thus, making a group of islands from what was once a very large island. It's actually a logical way of looking at it, because when people talk about a continent sinking, geologists say that that's impossible. But when you talk about the fact that the ocean rose around the world, it would seem as though, or it would look as though the continent sank.
So then let's ask the question about the ice caps that were there then. Were we able to determine that the ice caps were there before 14,000 years ago?
Based on geology, that's what happened. And geography was that, the ice caps were there. There was an ice age, and then something very dramatic happened. It could very well have been either the impact of a comet or meteor, or a comet coming so close to the Earth that it altered the axis and thereby shifted where the ice was in relation to the sun, causing a very rapid melting of the ice caps and causing the ocean levels to rise.
Now, we've seen that there is evidence scuba divers, even off Kauai, have found steps and structures off the island. Have you heard that bit of information?
No, but I find that intriguing, and I don't find it surprising, because if it's true what the elders of Hawaii say, that when the ocean level was 350 feet lower, that all these islands were grouped together as one landmass, being an ocean-going people, the vast majority of them would have lived along the coastline, and so all of the structures would now be 350 feet or so underwater. And the U.S., from when I was living in Hawaii, it seemed that the U.S. Navy was very restrictive in terms of people being allowed to do deep diving. Like private submarines were not allowed to go down in certain areas. So it sounds very, very much as though governments and other groups are trying to restrict any kind of diving activity because they don't want us to know what's there.
Interesting. There's also quite a bit of UFO reports and activity. Have you come across any of these yourself or through stories?
Yeah, actually I have. I just actually had a sighting about 4 nights ago, but the
You
first
personally?
main sighting I ever...
You personally?
Oh, yeah.
And you're in
Yes.
Cusco right now. You're in Peru.
Yeah, I'm in Peru. I was actually on the deck of our apartment in Paracas, which is just south of Lima, and it's about 10 o'clock at night, and I was out on the balcony, and I saw this cluster of 12 little lights all close together. And it's just one of those experiences where your brain starts racing trying to figure out what it is. I called my wife, who was inside. She came out and looked at it, and you just get this gut feeling that you're looking at something which isn't normal. So this cluster moved to the left and into the mist, and then came back to the right, and then shot basically straight up in the air. And one of the main reasons why I asked my wife to come out and look is because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating, and she saw them.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't birds, helicopters, planes, etc. They were what they were. And my first main sighting was actually on Maui when I was driving up, it's called up country, the Haleakala area, with my brother-in-law, and he was driving, and I was just looking straight, and there was a disc that was at least 100 feet long in the distance by a few miles, and it didn't move. And I saw it for almost 10 minutes. And again, my mind was going through all of the possible things that it could have been, but it couldn't fit this object into a box. Mm-hmm. So that was my intellect, racing madly, trying to figure something out. Whereas my spiritual side just said, look at it and be comfortable. This is actually a normal situation. Mm-hmm. So those are my two instances. But UFO activity, both in Peru and Hawaii, are very, very common.
What do you think about what is going on? Is it a dabbling with us, getting us used to seeing such things, not waiting for the government to disclose, but we, the people, to know in our hearts and to step above the programming that has been in our paradigm of negativity on those ETs? We're programmed to go into fear. So we really are, we the people, are disclosure. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree totally. I think it's a waste of time on that issue and almost, many other issues to say, well, what is the government doing? Forget the government. In terms of contact, I think a lot of the fear-mongering is completely artificial. I think, a lot of movies are made that way. They always have the military involved trying to shoot these things down because they're deemed as being, enemies or something. But the experiences that I have were simply doors opening, for myself, that they wanted me to see, that they were there. They were not emanating any kind of negativity. It's just, it's an expansion of consciousness and reality saying, you are part of, of the global or of the intergalactic family. So just accept that we're here, and we come because we're concerned about you. You are a very childish species, and we're concerned about what you're doing to the planet that you've been given to take care of. because it actually, I think, they're even saying because it will affect us if you blow up this planet, you will destroy the alignments of many other different planets and star systems, and you're not allowed to do that. But unfortunately, it's almost like what they say on Star Trek, where it's the prime directive. They're not allowed to interfere, but they will voluntarily assist if we ask them. And so I think it's an individual thing. It's not waiting for any government to do anything. Just,
Yeah.
it's a one-on-one relationship.
We're talking with Brien Foerster, and we'll be back in just a moment. You're invited to this online healing retreat, which is a journey into the ancient mysteries of our world, including Lemuria, Atlantis, and other sacred sites. Ancient site researcher Brien Foerster shares with us his images captured during the research of his many books.
The locations that I frequent in Peru, especially around Cusco and around Lake Titicaca, there are definitely places there which we are amassing evidence for the fact, like not the idea, but the fact that high technology existed thousands of years ago, and that the stone monuments are the remainder and reminder of an earlier people who were not just Lemurian, they were global in nature. Major connections in terms of proof of ancient technology are in Egypt and Peru, Bolivia.
Brien will share the story of the golden sun disk of Lemuria, which was taken with the Lemurian colonists to Peru.
There was a temple inside the Coricancha, which was the Sun Temple, sheeted completely in gold, and that was the first building that the Spanish gutted of its gold and destroyed. They literally tore it down to the foundation. There's no sign of it left anymore. The other temples are still there, the Moon Temple, Temple of the Rainbow, Temple of Lightning, but the Sun Temple was obliterated. But on the wall of that, there was a huge shield made out of either gold or another form of gold, and it was massive in size. The Spanish never actually got it because it was secreted away to Lake Titicaca and has been in hiding there ever since, because it was supposedly a gift from the people of Lemuria, or one of the last remaining large ceremonial items that was able to be taken from there before that place was, destroyed. I've heard from a lot of different people in and around Cusco that this giant sun disk did exist, and it still does. It's in safekeeping.
Synchronicity then led him to study a most fascinating subject of the elongated skull people, the focus of one of his upcoming books.
The first place I saw the skulls was in the little museum at the Coricancha, where the giant sun disk was supposed to have once been housed. And then I drew connections between the skulls there and those at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia. And my wife and I just happened to be traveling back from Chile about a year ago, and we stopped in this little seaside town called Paracas, and there was a museum, and in the museum there was one of these skulls again. I immediately became fascinated with that. The museum director said he had some more at home, and so I suggested that he bring them and put them in the museum, which he has done. And now I'm the assistant director of that museum, and we have 33 elongated skulls. I'm studying the ancient Paracas culture as well as medically through medical people, the skulls themselves, to see in what ways they're similar and in what ways they're different from both human beings of the same time period and present-day humans. And it's getting incredibly intriguing. What I'm looking at now is connecting the megalithic sites of Peru and Bolivia with the elongated skull people. And the more and more I look, the more and more I'm finding connections between the two. It seems like the skulls that we've been finding are the descendants of whoever the ancient megalithic builders were, this very mysterious people with amazing abilities to work stone.
Register today and join us on this visual journey to the world's ancient sacred sites with Brien Foerster. And we're back with Brien Foerster on Healing Conversations. So when you are heading out to Easter Island this week, today, and you are also looking back at the other places that you've visited, what evidence, besides the two stone objects that you were shown in Hawaii, what other evidence points to Lemuria?
Well, it's all of the locations that I frequent in Peru, especially around Cusco and around Lake Titicaca. There are definitely places there which we are amassing evidence for the fact, like not the idea, but the fact that high technology existed thousands of years ago, and that the stone monuments are the remainder and reminder of an earlier people who were not just Lemurian, they were global in nature. Major connections in terms of proof of ancient technology are in Egypt and Peru, Bolivia.
So it was a global civilization. Some have called it the Aramu, the dragon culture, or the snake culture. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and actually that relates again back to Hawaiian and other Polynesian storytelling or oral traditions, where they speak of, in Hawaii it's called the mo'o, and in other parts of Polynesia I believe it's called the moko, and that's an ancestral serpent or snake or lizard-like being, which is regarded as being an ancestral being, or the concept of the snake, and even that's why as far as I know, in modern day New Zealand, known as Aotearoa by the Maori people, grandchildren are called mokopuna, which means, I believe, descended from the lizard or reptilian. It's not the same as the reptilians that people think of in terms of aliens, of being this evil thing. It's just this ancestral being or life force that we symbolize as being a snake, and that's that's in global cultures.
Yes, and then it led to the Great White Brotherhood.
Yeah, there are stories around Lake Titicaca, of course, of there being, being not really bases, but ancient archaeological sites, which was where these people or beings lived.
And it's fascinating when we talk about Lake Titicaca and the sun disk. That is a fascinating story because in Cusco, in the main Spanish church that's now standing on what was there in the past, are the holes for the sun disk.
Yeah, well, I've written 6 books about the Inca so far. And the Coricancha, which is the building I believe you're referring to, I was there 3 days ago, guiding an engineer from the UK around. And the basic story about that is that there was a temple inside the Coricancha, which was the Sun Temple, sheeted completely in gold. And that was the first building that the Spanish gutted of its gold and destroyed. They literally tore it down to the foundation, and so there's no sign of it left anymore. The other temples are still there, the Moon Temple, Temple of the Rainbow, Temple of Lightning, but the Sun Temple was obliterated. But on the wall of that, there was a huge shield made out of either gold or another form of gold, and it was massive in size. The Spanish never actually got it because it was secreted away to Lake Titicaca and has been hiding, or has been in hiding there ever since, because it was supposedly a gift from the people of Lemuria, or one of the last remaining large ceremonial items that was able to be taken from there before that place was, destroyed. So suppose, I've heard from a lot of different people in and around Cusco that this giant sun disk did exist, and it still does. It's in safekeeping, or it's lost somewhere around Lake Titicaca.
Well, let's hope it's not lost and that it's waiting
Yeah.
for a time to be used again on the planet. Do you have any indication of what it was used for or any powers that it could have had?
Well, the stories vary, of course, but from what I hear, it was used as a communication device. And so that's why it was given to the Inca for safekeeping, because they were, after the downfall of Mu or Lemuria, they were the Inca, who were, again, very mysterious people. They weren't just, your average human being or average Native American people. They were very highly super evolved people. And so the giant sun disk was given to them to take care of and to use. But once the Spanish were about to destroy Cusco, the Inca priests knew that they were coming, and they secreted that away, as well as the mummies of the Inca and the majority of the gold. So the Spanish were never able to get all of the gold from Cusco. They only got a portion of it. The rest of it is still in tunnels and in the lakes around the area.
Boy, you'd think that there would be some people putting on scuba diving gear and searching for it.
Oh, there are, but the thing is, the Peruvian government is very, very restrictive about any kind of activity like that.
Good.
And the tunnels, I've been to the entrances of some of the tunnels. The smaller, there's supposed to be massive tunnel systems in Peru, but I've been to the entrances of some of the smaller ones, and they've been blocked off by the government. And their excuse is, they say that if anyone was to enter and get injured, they would sue the government. But we know that there's a much deeper meaning behind it, because some people don't want these things discovered, and they certainly don't want them to be taken up by treasure hunters.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Well, you just brought up the mummies of Peru, and what I find incredibly fascinating, and maybe you are familiar with this as well, is that on the cliff sides there are caves where mummies are buried, and this is in Peru, and also in Tibet. There is a documentary on Tibet. It's called The Cave Mummies of Tibet. It's fascinating that just like the Lemurian colonists went to Peru, they also went to Tibet. There's a link there as well, especially when you see that both civilizations in Peru and Tibet were burying mummies in caves.
Yeah, well, there is definitely a connection. Even if I made a little video that I put on YouTube comparing the dress of Tibetan monks with that of the Hawaiian alii, the royalty. And what you'll notice is the colors are exactly the same. The shapes of their headdresses are exactly the same, as well as the color, and their capes. And so I just put in a bunch of, like a slideshow of these different both Tibet and Hawaii going back and forth, asking people to identify which was what. And I think there's definitely a connection, because they're both ancient places of knowledge, storehouses of knowledge.
Yes, fascinating. It really is very interesting. Now, you've also done a video on the elongated skulls down in Peru, and what does that tell us?
Well, the interesting thing is that's another synchronistic thing, because the first place I saw the skulls was in the little museum at the Coricancha, where the giant sun disk was supposed to have once been housed. And then I drew connections between the skulls there and those at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia. And my wife and I just happened to be traveling back from Chile about a year ago, and we stopped in this little seaside town called Paracas, and there was a museum, and in the museum there was one of these skulls again. So I immediately became fascinated with that. The museum director said he had some more at home, and so I suggested that he bring them and put them in the museum, which he has done. And now I'm the assistant director of that museum, and we have 33 elongated skulls. And
Wow.
I'm studying the ancient Paracas culture as well as medically, not myself, but through medical people, the skulls themselves, to see in what ways they're similar and in what ways they're different from both human beings of the same time period and present-day humans. And it's getting incredibly intriguing.
What are you finding?
Well, there are a number of different physical characteristics which medical people have told me are not human.
Mm.
And they say that certain characteristics are, can't be birth defects. They say they're impossible characteristics. For example, every human skull has 3 major cranial plates or bone plates. And these start to be formed, of course, in the fetus. And then the baby, of course, has a very soft bone material in order for the baby to easily leave the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's these 3 bone plates that over time grow towards each other and fuse. So that's what your and my and, everyone else on the planet, who's quote-unquote Homo sapiens has. But we have a number of these skulls that only have 2 of these plates. And there are many other factors. The skulls are twice the thickness and weight of a normal human. The cranial volume is larger. There are small holes in the back of the elongated part of the head which allow for nerves and blood vessels to leave in order to feed that part of the skull.
Mm-hmm.
Genetic differences in teeth. The list is kind of growing.
How old are they?
Well, that's the thing that will require more funding. No one's really studied these since about 1928, and so carbon-14 didn't exist at that time. Analysis, and of course DNA analysis didn't. So they're minimum 2,000 years old, but how old they actually are, we don't know, because we haven't been able to afford the carbon-14 or DNA testing to find out.
Very interesting that they were found in the same place with the sun disk in the Sun Temple in Cusco.
Well, exactly. It seems definitely now that the Inca and the people of Paracas who lived on the coast were probably related people, and other factors include the fact that they had red hair, whereas normal Indian people of the Americas are very black, very jet black hair. These people had very auburn-colored hair, and that's part of the book I'm writing about, because the same story is told in Easter Island, Tahiti, and Hawaii, and New Zealand.
Yes.
About this ancient ancestral people.
That is true about the big red-haired people.
Uh-huh.
And you have the skulls.
Yes, and actually the hair as well, hair samples.
Oh, you have the hair as well.
Oh, yeah, we have...
Wow.
I'm just amazed because, again, because no one's really studied this. Well, I've just been able to find all sorts of things, and it's not only that the hair's red, it's not straight. It's kind of wavy hair as well.
Mm.
So, and thinner. It's thinner in diameter than most Native American hair, which tends to be, thicker,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you're on to something very good here, Brien. Very nice work.
Thank you.
Now, Lake Titicaca, we'll go back to the UFOs. That is the locals call it the locals say that that's where the star people come in, and they've seen lights from within the lake. Any news on your end to share?
Well, the thing is, it's so common around Lake Titicaca and the highlands of Peru that people there find it odd that we're so interested in it because it's a very common event for them to see, lights in the sky, ships. They tend to average, I think, about 20 feet in diameter, but, ships moving across the sky, lights in Lake Titicaca and that sort of thing. It's been happening in Peru and Bolivia for so many centuries that people, again, find it, kind of odd that we're so intrigued with it because they just think it's normal.
They have a knowing that that's where they came from, it seems to me.
That could very well be. I haven't been able to get too in depth with that aspect of it yet. I know Jorge Luis Delgado, who was a major shamanic person on or in the area of Lake Titicaca. He was on 2 episodes of Ancient Aliens with me. He's just very straightforward, talking on the subject of star beings or star brothers or space brothers or whatever title you want to give them. It's just it seems to just be normal for a lot of these people, whereas for us it's I think it's because we're too left-brained. We tend to be too intellectual and want things explained, whereas a lot of other people in other countries and other other lifestyles tend to be possibly more right-brained, and they are just it's like, oh well, that's just part of who we are, or that's common, or why are you so interested in this? It is quite amazing.
Yes, well, we've been programmed here in America and most of the Western world against that. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. With the movies, and again, they always show like War of the Worlds. It's always these beings attacking or being menacing. A great film, if you've never seen it, is the movie Starman that John Carpenter made with Jeff Bridges. And that's one of the most, I think, brilliant portrayals of of a life form coming to this planet and showing not only that he's more highly evolved in terms of his abilities, but he's actually more human than we are because of just the way he relates to people and animals. This pure compassion.
Yes, more evolved spiritually.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what I feel, and I know many others feel, and you even mentioned it as well. They're here to help and to assist. Yes.
Exactly.
Now, before we go, let's talk about some of the megaliths, some of the big structures in Peru and around the area, as well as even in the Pacific. I don't know if you're familiar with Non Madal on Pohnpei, but even the giant stones on Pohnpei, or even the giant structures in Peru at some of those sacred sites in the Sacred Valley that are so huge, and they seem to be cut perfectly and fit perfectly together. What have you been able to discern about their origination?
Well, that's an evolving process. This man who was who I guided last week, who's an engineer, like I was saying, he was literally blown away by what he saw, and the common stories that archaeologists say of how these things were done, he simply laughed at. One example is Sacsayhuaman, which I'm sure everyone will have seen photographs of. That's the massive wall that's above Cusco. It's almost in a zigzag pattern. Mm-hmm. And these stones are up to 17 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and 7 feet in depth. And the intriguing thing was, when I've been to Cusco 16 times, and every time I go, I try to hire a different local guide in order to get little snippets of more of the information. And the one we had, he made a profound statement, and he's, because Dan, the engineer, said, how deep are these in the ground? Because the whole wall is still perfect. Nothing's moved, it's a very earthquake-prone area. And the guide said 4 meters. So that means that all the stones are in the ground at least 4 meters deep. And that means, excuse me, the largest ones are 30 feet long, and that makes them 125 tons. So, these are not things that the Inca built. And the Inca, if you read the Spanish chronicles, even state that. When the Spanish asked them, did you build this? The Inca said, no, these were here when we got here. And, excuse me, but that's also the story of Cusco. Cusco is much older than the Inca. The Inca found it abandoned, almost like a science fiction set, and they built their city on top of and next to much older structures, like the Coricancha, which is the building that held the giant sun disk.
Yeah, and there we go again. It seems just very Lemurian colonists.
Yeah, and the thing is, because the Sacred Valley outside of Cusco is so incredibly productive agriculturally, it's a logical place for people to live. It's in terms of growing food and climate, it's a wonderful area. And anyone of high intelligence, would of course build in a place that was abundant in terms of water and food. They wouldn't build in the middle of nowhere and have to struggle. These people probably like their comfort.
What about Moray and that structure? What do you feel was going on there, besides any of the typical local tradition that it was used to experiment with different vegetation at different levels? Do you think it could be used for another purpose?
Well, that's a great question, because once again, engineer Dan, I showed him practically everything over the course of 5 days, at least of the main, the main structures. He went to Machu Picchu yesterday by himself, but I took him to Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman and all the major structures around Cusco. And the one that impressed him the most was Moray or Morai. And it's the sound quality of the place that really blew him away, because he's an electronics engineer.
Ah.
So when I explained to him, I said, well, the story is, the Inca built it to be an agricultural experimentation station, because each of the concentric rings of it is supposed to represent a microclimate, which has since been disproved.
Uh-huh.
And he just laughed at that, and he said, no, this is about sound.
Oh.
And so, it could have been a huge amphitheater or something more complicated, because one note that he had was, we could hear from across, this is like a huge coliseum made out of, made in the ground, 7 distinct levels going down. And so it's at least 1/8 of a mile across, if not more. And he said, I can hear tiny birds on the other side of that thing. And he even used, a very logical man, but he kept saying, this place is spooky, because of the way that sound, the sound was moving all over the place through it. So it's far more complicated than an experimental station, and it's too finely built for that. It's, I'm sure in its prime, it was perfect in terms of its engineering design. But now, now it's looking a little worse for wear. But it's still, anytime I take people there to look, and what people who've never been there have to realize, that you don't see it from the distance. You have to walk up to the edge of it, and it's almost like looking down into a little Grand Canyon, but it's perfect concentric rings, and they are always, completely astonished by it.
You know what is another interesting fact is that when we were there, over on the back one, there's another one just below the other glacier. If you were to look out and look at the glacier that's there, there's another one that's not kept so well. There were little tiny seashells, spiral-shaped seashells all over. Some in our group said this is evidence that this was at one time the ocean and it was
Hmm.
uplifted. And then there were others that feel that it was used for ceremony and these shells were brought by the people visiting.
You do find seashells in the strangest places in the Andes. Around ceremonial sites, I found a piece of spondulus at a place called Tambo Machai, which isn't too far away. And spondulus is only found off the coast of Ecuador. But
Hmm.
yeah, there's so many odd and intriguing things in Cusco in the Sacred Valley, and that's what keeps drawing me back because you can never completely figure it out. It just keeps, once you've read one chapter of the book, somebody throws another 100 chapters at you and says, "Read that."
Yeah, it's a deep rabbit hole.
Oh
It is
yeah, yeah.
truly, you are rewriting, you and the people who are following this trail are literally rewriting history.
Yeah, well, I guess we are, not to be arrogant in saying that. It's just we have been lied to.
Yeah.
The idea that civilization is 5,500 years old, when you can see all over the world, but especially I think in Peru and in Egypt, especially, when you get people like engineers and other scientists fascinated by it, that our history goes back much, much farther than that. And whenever you hear things like, legends or stories or fables, there's always some grain of absolute factual truth in it.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Brien Foerster. Your website is, among many others, one is hiddenincatours.com, and you also have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, hiddenincatours.com, and then my webmaster, who's a genius, who's actually living in India because he's following his spiritual path. He made another website for me called hiddenincavideos.com, and so it has the top 100 of the videos that I've made because I've got 650 on YouTube, and this way each video is within a category. So if you're interested in ancient aliens, there are a cluster or is a cluster of videos about that. Puma Punku, there are several about that. So that just makes it easier for the viewer to be able to focus in on what videos they want to look at, as compared to YouTube, which is great, but it can be kind of messy when you're trying to find the next video in a series.
Yes, it's a great way to sit down and just let those videos roll. They play one after another. If anyone wanted to go to Peru and you could never get there physically, Brien Foerster has done an excellent job of bringing that to life for you. And if you do get to go, you can even join him on one of his tours as well. So wouldn't you find that this is all related, pretty much all related, all the way back to Lemuria?
Definitely. Whatever Lemuria or Mu was, I think my entire life basically has been a subconscious pursuit of it. And that's where Easter Island naturally comes into play next because the book I'm writing now, which is called Crimson Horizon, about the red-haired people of the Pacific, Easter Island strategically is there, or would have been a place where anyone sailing on the Pacific from South America to Polynesia would stop at Easter Island, if for nothing more than for water and food. I've been a sailor all my life, and so I've really been studying the Pacific from that perspective, from the oral traditions, but also from wayfinding, like how you travel with the stars.
Yes.
And Easter Island, definitely, it's a strategically placed island in terms of winds and currents. And it's thanks to Thor Heyerdahl for, doing the groundbreaking work with the Kon-Tiki that showed that these native people could have done this could have traveled the Pacific very much on purpose, not accidentally, which is often the excuse. For example, that Hawaii was accidentally found. I think that's, completely ridiculous.
Yes, and so to be bold one day when we can see Hawaii return to the people. I know that that is part of the mission that I would help in my life as well, because that is quite atrocious when you see that in the 50s America just walked right in and took it. So that is a whole relationship moving into the future that needs to be healed between America and Hawaii.
I wrote a book about the real history of Hawaii, because most books about Hawaii are about Captain Cook and about pineapples, and not about the people, not about the fact that the people have lived there for at least 2,000 years. And Hawaii was stolen from Queen Liliuokalani and the Hawaiian people, actually in the late 19th century. And the reason why the U.S. won't give it up is probably because of Pearl Harbor. But still, Hawaiians live as not as second-rate citizens; they live as third-rate citizens in Hawaii, and that's their homeland.
Yes.
And that I find it personally offensive.
Yes, it's appalling.
Yeah, that the only way in general that the public, like the 12 million people who visit Hawaii a year, they see very little of the culture except luau's, which are, to a great extent, very poor depictions or portrayals of the great Hawaiian culture. And since very few books are written about it, I wrote a book 15 years after the aunties in Hawaii taught me things, in order to provide some information for the visitor on where the Hawaiians came from, and their story.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do, Brien, and we will be looking forward to talking with you again after your journey to Easter Island and the completion of your book. A few months later, I was able to catch up with Brien Foerster, and here's that conversation. Okay, so Brien Foerster, bring me up to date. Here we are. You've gone through Easter Island, you've gone to Glastonbury, and you're back in Peru. What have you been up to? What's the latest research?
What I'm looking at now is connecting the megalithic sites of Peru and Bolivia with the elongated skull people. And the more and more I look, the more and more I'm finding connections between the two. It seems like the skulls that we've been finding are the descendants of whoever the ancient megalithic builders were, this very mysterious people with amazing abilities to work stone.
Can you go deeper on that? They lived on Earth, but they looked different. Do we have any indication of why their heads were elongated? Is it a different race?
That's what I'm trying to find out more of. It's obvious that most of the skulls and remains that we found are those of people whose skulls were cranially manipulated. They were shaped from childhood, or actually from babyhood, to form this, almost cone head shape, and that was to be a reflection of what the ancestors looked like. So what I'm trying to find is evidence of the ancestors themselves. The most profound skulls have been found, again, where megalithic sites are, like amazing stone structures and walls and things which don't have any mortar or binding material involved with them. They're just beautifully cut stones that fit together with the kind of precision that we can only really do or could have done in the 20th century.
We're not familiar with what that technology is, or you're just beginning to dabble into it.
Yeah, well, Christopher Dunn, who's the man who wrote the Giza power plant, he will be coming in less than 3 weeks, and I'll be with him and 28 guests to travel around Peru and Bolivia, looking at megalithic sites and looking at evidence of ancient machining technologies like cut marks and other surface and marks and things that machines would have done that the primitive tools that the Inca had could not possibly have done.
And do you find, is there any talk of use of mind power to do that, or sound?
That's what we're looking at. We're looking at an ancient form of some kind of vibrational technology. It may not have been sound. It might have been much higher frequency than sound, that had the ability to not only cut stone,
but also manipulate its makeup, possibly allowing these ancient builders to soften stone without heating it, and in that way be able to shape it into place.
Almost like dematerializing it.
Something like that. The example I give is it's almost like they turn stone into marshmallows for a very short period of time, and then the stone solidified, maintaining the shape that we find it in today.
Vibrational technology, were they pulling down forces, cosmic forces, or mind power?
Could be a combination of the use of natural forces, the use of mind power, and or the use of a technology that we don't have. It could be a combination of all of them, or one or two of them together. We just don't know.
What about your visit to Easter Island? What was the most profound thing that you've learned there?
Actually, it was quite profound because we were fortunate that one of the elder members of the royal family of Easter Island, which they call Rapa Nui, was there at the time. I'd met her almost 20 years ago, and she acted as our guide for 4 days and showed me as a friend the ancient places and gave me explanations of how things were done and how the people lived in antiquity.
Really good insight. You're going to be putting that into your upcoming books, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Good. So where are you off to next?
Chris Dunn is coming down August the 1st. We have 28 guests coming with us. We'll be going through Cusco, the Sacred Valley, Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, Nazca, Paracas. And then in November, Megalithomania, which is another tour group, is coming with about the same number of people. We'll be doing the same route, but we're also going to Easter Island after that with Dr. Robert Schock, who's the man who was able to date the Sphinx in Egypt at being older than the dynastic period. It's minimum 8,000 years old.
Your videos are awesome. Keep us in the loop. You are a new paradigm researcher, TV host, all wrapped up in one, and we just really love the work that you're doing. You've got big things going for you, Brien. We're going to watch as you documentaries out there. Have you been approached for your knowledge?
Actually, yeah, we're in the works possibly of a 5-year series based out of a company in Hollywood who wants to do 5 years worth of episodes of finding concrete or realistic evidence of Atlantis, of Lemuria, Mu, and of the global culture that existed before the end of the Ice Age. So rather than a speculative thing, it's going to have a huge crew of scientists on board to finally nail down what was Atlantis, when was it, and also Lemuria, too.
That is wonderful that mainstream Hollywood is even entertaining a movie about Lemuria and Atlantis. And I just love how the scientific world is matching up with that and confirming it. And you're right there at the forefront. Excellent. How exciting.
I'm also looking forward to going to Egypt for the first time in April, Stephen Mailer. And again, looking for signs of ancient technology having been used there to build the famous structures that we know of, as in the Great Pyramid and some of the lesser-known sites.
The Sphinx, as you mentioned earlier, we've dated that it's much older than the previous, the carbon data testing systems show us. It goes back to the Sphinx being built. Would you say it's from Atlantis? Have you done any research on that yet? Is there a connection to Atlantis?
Well, according to the work of Stephen Mailer, and that's based on the oral traditions of the Commission people, who are the pre-Pharaonic period, that people have lived in the area of Egypt for tens of thousands of years. The pharaohs were simply they were simply a part of actually recent history, and that structures such as the Great Pyramid and other places were there, and actually probably in a state of decay by the time the pharaohs arrived. The pharaohs simply adopted the sites and renamed them according to what they wanted them to be called.
Interesting. And so that's in April of 2013.
Yeah.
Is there another book that you're compiling?
I'm working on 3 books right now. One of them is The Lost Technology, or Lost Ancient Technology of Peru and Bolivia. Another one is going to be the 2nd volume about the elongated skull people. And the 3rd one is going to be about the gods of Polynesia, and trying to find evidence that they weren't gods, that they were actual ancient people who became deified by the Polynesian people. One should be finished this year, and the other 2 will probably be sometime next year.
All right, so what are you going to do for the great end of the 26,000-year cycle and the start of the next 26,000-year cycle?
Well, according to what I've heard, there's no great event that's going to happen on that day, because the universe doesn't work in clockwork precision the way we think it does. So I think we're already entering the new golden age. It's not a time of destruction. It's a time of the rebuilding and the re-spiriting of humanity. So that's at least what I've heard the true mind elders have said, is that a lot of authors have, Western authors have written, really wrong information about the Mayan calendar, and that we're entering an age of enlightenment and an age of evolution, and not that there will be no real destruction as far as they're concerned.
So that's really good to know that we're moving into a new spiriting of humanity. And while it's nothing that's going to be a specific day, is there going to be a quickening of anything, or do you see it as just more people waking up on a mass level?
I think definitely. I think what we're seeing is, we're seeing things like governments breaking down and that sort of thing, which is probably a really good thing to happen, because we've been controlled by these representatives for too long. And there's been too much of a sense of isolation with people calling themselves Americans or Peruvians or whatever. I think we're entering a period of time where we become true global citizens, and that's where the internet is wonderful, because it's like the giant brain that will help us to connect with each other, free of any kind of inhibitions or restrictions from governments, ideologies, or belief systems, or of any kind. We will become a global culture of humanity.
Yes, exciting times. And you are leading the way with the work that you're doing. Thank you, Brien Foerster. It's been lovely to catch up with you.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. Anytime, Lauren.
And thank you, too, for listening to this Healing Conversations Summer Series of 2012. Please like our Facebook page and be sure to share this program with your friends and family so we can get this important information out to the rest of the world. I now leave you with music from the universe, literally created by the universe, as computer music researcher Phil Windsor assigned musical notes to mathematical equations. And the result is this beautiful music, available at acoustichealth.com. You're invited to this online healing retreat, which is a journey into the ancient mysteries of our world, including Lemuria, Atlantis, and other sacred sites. Ancient site researcher Brien Foerster shares with us his images captured during the research of his many books.
The locations that I frequent in Peru, especially around Cusco and around Lake Titicaca, there are definitely places there which we are amassing evidence for the fact, like not the idea, but the fact that high technology existed thousands of years ago, and that the stone monuments are the remainder and reminder of an earlier people who were not just Lemurian, they were global in nature. Major connections in terms of proof of ancient technology are in Egypt and Peru, Bolivia.
Brien will share the story of the golden sun disk of Lemuria, which was taken with the Lemurian colonists to Peru.
There was a temple inside the Coricancha, which was the Sun Temple, sheeted completely in gold, and that was the first building that the Spanish gutted of its gold and destroyed. They literally tore it down to the foundation. There's no sign of it left anymore. The other temples are still there, the Moon Temple, Temple of the Rainbow, Temple of Lightning, but the Sun Temple was obliterated. But on the wall of that, there was a huge shield made out of either gold or another form of gold, and it was massive in size. The Spanish never actually got it because it was secreted away to Lake Titicaca and has been in hiding there ever since, because it was supposedly a gift from the people of Lemuria, or one of the last remaining large ceremonial items that was able to be taken from there before that place was, destroyed. I've heard from a lot of different people in and around Cusco that this giant sun disk did exist, and it still does. It's in safekeeping.
Synchronicity then led him to study a most fascinating subject of the elongated skull people, the focus of one of his upcoming books.
The first place I saw the skulls was in the little museum at the Coricancha, where the giant sun disk was supposed to have once been housed. And then I drew connections between the skulls there and those at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia. And my wife and I just happened to be traveling back from Chile about a year ago, and we stopped in this little seaside town called Paracas, and there was a museum, and in the museum there was one of these skulls again. I immediately became fascinated with that. The museum director said he had some more at home, and so I suggested that he bring them and put them in the museum, which he has done. And now I'm the assistant director of that museum, and we have 33 elongated skulls. I'm studying the ancient Paracas culture as well as medically through medical people, the skulls themselves, to see in what ways they're similar and in what ways they're different from both human beings of the same time period and present-day humans. And it's getting incredibly intriguing. What I'm looking at now is connecting the megalithic sites of Peru and Bolivia with the elongated skull people. And the more and more I look, the more and more I'm finding connections between the two. It seems like the skulls that we've been finding are the descendants of whoever the ancient megalithic builders were, this very mysterious people with amazing abilities to work stone.
Register today and join us on this visual journey to the world's ancient sacred sites with Brien Foerster.